Hi, everyone. I'm Colin Green, Director of Business Development with Axios Pro. I'm thrilled to welcome you to Ask the Newsroom, what we're watching in 2025, a live conversation and Q&A led by Axios Pro reporters Victoria Knight, Nick Sobczak, Maria Curie, and our moderator, Senior Editor David Nather. Today, our team will delve into a strategic conversation and live Q&A session focused on the pivotal policy shifts anticipated in 2025 under the new administration. We'll follow up our deep dive with a Q&A, beginning with a few pre-submitted questions and then taking live audience questions, which we will invite you to type into the chat. This is being led by our deeply sourced reporters here at Axios Pro Policy, who have been on the Hill for years covering these topics. Their experience allows them to curate premium policy content that separates what's real from what's just noise. You set our agenda, and what we cover is a reflection of your priorities. So stick around for a minute after today's webinar to learn more about how Axios Pro can deliver smarter, faster news and analysis for your organization. But before we dive into the discussion, I want to take a moment to ask about the issues that are most relevant to your role in industry so we can get a sense of where our audience stands. So the poll, as you can see come up on your screen, is what are you watching most closely next year? Reconciliation, appropriations, legislation outside of reconciliation, or oversight. So we'll take a moment to wait for everyone to select their choice. All right. Great. So it sounds like there is a pretty even split amongst the crowd with appropriations and legislation outside of reconciliation, but we also have folks also paying attention to just reconciliation. So it sounds like a mixed bag, but without further ado, please welcome our Axios Pro reporters, Victoria, Nick, Maria, and our senior policy editor, David Nather.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us for this and taking time out of your day. We'd love to talk to you about what we're looking for next year, the policy shifts that we're seeing, because there's going to be a few of them. What we're hearing across Washington about these kinds of shifts, the legislative trends we're analyzing, will there ever be PBM legislation or AI legislation? Stay tuned and you'll find out. And what we're watching now and what might happen next. So why don't we start with healthcare? And Victoria, I think everybody be curious to know what you're watching in the closing weeks, days, hours of the lame duck, and then what are you watching next year in terms of healthcare and PBMs and your favorite program 340B and anything else you want to throw in?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm sure as people that are following health policy are aware, as of last week, there were talks between, Democrats and Republicans on trying to put together a healthcare package. There's been a lot of offers going back and forth since that kind of started last week, and what the package looks like, we're not completely sure on. We know it could be decided within like today, over the weekend. We do know some of the things that were included and some of the, kind of initial opening things. And I think those are important to see, kind of the priorities and what, if it doesn't make it into a package or a package doesn't materialize, that could be picked up again next year. And so some of those things are, there is PBM reform in there, kind of based on what was included in the telehealth packages that passed out of Energy and Commerce, Ways and Means, some small reforms to how PBMs are paid, Part D delinking, also the telehealth. So there's been talk from what I've heard back and forth of how long a telehealth extension might go, and that's kind of for flexibilities for telehealth in the Medicare program. Also prior auth, the prior auth bill that would require Medicare Advantage plans to kind of streamline their prior authorization systems, make it easier to approve treatments. That was, in some offers, and I'm not sure it's on the final table, but so that's, I think that what this package materializes, which we don't know yet, but we should know soon. I think that'll say a lot about what happens next year. And so if those things are picked up again. So I literally just in the hall this morning was asking the new incoming chairman of Energy and Commerce, Brett Guthrie, what he wants to do next year. And he was saying, I want to pick up transparency if it doesn't happen right now. So definitely health transparency is big for him. He talked about PBM reform as well. And also the Support Act is big for him as well. So I think those are all things to watch. And then, yeah, as David mentioned, 340B as well. I think that's definitely something we're going to see. We have interest from, incoming Help Chair Bill Cassidy. Also, it's an interest of incoming the new Senate Majority Leader John Thune. So those are two big people in the Senate that want to see reforms for this program. I know it's something Energy and Commerce has worked on this Congress as well. So I think that's something we could see kind of changes to the way, providers are given discounts or how pharma gives out discounts. So it's something to watch as well. And I also did a story this week on that I thought was really interesting, just figuring out, will there be healthcare and reconciliation? I think that's something that's still being determined too. And so I was asking senators this week, is there any chance for ACA subsidies? And they didn't want to definitively say no. And when I talked to some House members, they did say some kind of healthcare should be in there, even if they didn't want ACA subsidies. So I think figuring out if there is healthcare and reconciliation is another big thing too.
That's great. Thanks, Victoria. So, just to be clear, this conversation with incoming ENC Chair Guthrie was today, right?
Yes, yes.
This
Or
morning?
actually yesterday, but I also talked to him this morning too. So yeah.
Well, kind of both. So,
Yeah.
you're getting breaking news right here. So thank you. And if any of you are working on the end of the year healthcare package, if you could just text it to Victoria, that would be fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you. Why don't we move on to energy? And Nick, you want to tell us what you're watching for the next couple of weeks on permitting and anything else that's on the radar, and then especially what you're watching next year?
Yeah. So for the next week and a half or so, it's all sort of permitting reform. Will they or won't they? That's been happening for months, honestly, years now. I would say that my outlook this week, based on our conversations with the committee leaders that are working on the bill, is pretty pessimistic. If I had to bet right now, I would probably bet it will not ride on a year-end CR. But it's hard to tell because Joe Manchin is working on this and he's pretty good at negotiating these things historically and is also historically full of surprises. So I mean, the main issue right now is, you have this Manchin-Barrasso proposal that came out of Senate ENR that applies only to energy projects for the most part. It's got some provisions on transmission. It's got some provisions on the National Environmental Policy Act. It's got some provisions on renewable and fossil fuel leasing, a little bit of something for everybody. But House Republicans, mainly Bruce Westerman, the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, want to do a broader overhaul of the National Environmental Policy Act that applies to everything. And stuff like, putting a stricter statute of limitations on NEPA has been controversial with Democrats. And it seems to me right now, just from our conversations, that they're having some trouble getting Democrats on board with that, especially Tom Carper, who until the end of this year is still the chair of the Senate EPW committee. So he'll probably have some say here. The word on the street is that the CR could be released Sunday. So we'll know more by then. And until then, it's a little bit uncertain. But as of this week, what's been happening is, leadership has sort of discussed it at a high level, but Bruce Westerman told us that they haven't brought a hard proposal to Speaker Johnson yet. So that sort of indicates to me that anything could happen in the next couple of days, but it's a little iffy right now. A handful of other energy related priorities that kind of fell out of the NDAA also that I'm looking at in the next week and a half, namely the International Nuclear Security Act. which, like I said, fell out of the NDAA. And then next year, it's going to be all reconciliation. The main question being how much of the IRA will Republicans peel back? I've been kind of thinking about this in a few different buckets. Things I'm fairly certain will at least be have an attempt to be repealed are the methane fee that's administered by EPA from the IRA and all the EPA grant money that is still left over for environmental justice and stuff like that. Pretty much unanimously, Republicans hate that stuff. Probably to stuff that will probably be repealed. EV tax credits. I think we'll also see additional anti-China type restrictions on the advanced manufacturing tax credits from the IRA. And then also, at least we'll see proposed modifications to the energy production and investment tax credits, which are kind of the centerpiece of the law and also the most expensive part of the climate aspects of the IRA. So I think at least proposed modifications, if not full repeal, but it's hard to tell there because, the Republicans who say they support parts of the IRA are a little bit vague. And it also depends on who you talk to, because some Republicans support sort of the advanced manufacturing stuff. Some have a lot of renewables. So it's we don't know yet. And then a bucket of who knows stuff that's probably on the table. And that's DOE grant programs, loan programs office funds. Seems like Republicans would target that. But again, it's hard to tell because it benefits a lot of different places around the country. And then sort of other energy incentives. Also, in terms of reconciliation next year, a lot of discussion so far among staff and lawmakers about paying for part of this with additional lease sales for fossil fuels on public lands. Not clear what that would look like yet, but probably we're looking at like mandated oil and gas leasing in some form, similar to actually what Democrats did with the IRA at the behest of Joe Manchin. And then I think the sort of big question here is two bills or one. Obviously, Senate, probably as everyone here knows, the Senate Republicans have discussed doing, a domestic policy bill, including energy first, and then doing a tax bill. And House Republicans have so far seemed to reject that idea. I think this matters for the policy issues insofar as it affects how Republicans will view pay-fors, and specifically affects how they will view sort of IRA provisions as pay-fors. And then non-reconciliation thing, I'll just say that something that's on my mind this week is a possible bipartisan package on critical minerals. The House China Committee has talked a bunch about this over the past 2 years. They just dropped a bunch of bills yesterday. Several of them are bipartisan. One Republican bill is, we wrote a little bit about this yesterday and today, is a new $2.5 billion critical minerals reserve, which is kind of an interesting idea. And there's a lot of bipartisan momentum around countering China and developing domestic and friendly supply chains for the minerals that are needed for the energy transition and for renewables and defense applications and batteries, that sort of thing. So I think that's something that we'll definitely see discussed next year. It's definitely TBD where that pans out. But if you want a marker of where that conversation is going, the House China Committee bills are a good place to start.
That's great. Thank you, Nick, and especially helpful reconciliation preview, and also sounds like some last minute suspense for the lame duck. So thank you. Can we move on to tech? And Maria, curious what you're watching these last couple of weeks and into next year. And I don't know, are we ever going to get AI legislation, of the kind that we've all been watching out for?
I think the short answer is no. I think we started out I think we started out this Congress with some pretty high ambitions, with, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's insight forums and a bipartisan report that called for $32 billion for AI non-defense funding. And we're ending the year with those negotiations really falling apart for
Uh-oh, the suspense. I think Maria might have frozen. Why don't we, while we wait for that to get figured out, we can move on to some of the questions that have been submitted to us in advance. This first question is a Maria question, so why don't we move to the next one? How will the Chevron decision affect how legislation has to be written? Nick, I think you wrote about this recently, so maybe you can share with us some of what you learned.
I did, yeah. So obviously the longstanding precedent of Chevron deference, which basically was where the court deferred to agencies on the interpretation of laws that were vague. The Supreme Court overturned that over the summer. And I think broadly everyone thinks that it means Congress will have to be more specific with how it writes legislative language. More specifically, I don't think anyone knows what that means. So there are a number of people that are thinking about this. I reported the other day, Bipartisan Policy Center has a new working group on that that's meeting with Hill staff and trying to develop like kind of like a white paper type of thing to help lawmakers understand like what this means for how they legislate. You have Senate Republicans have their own sort of working group on this, and then House Dems on the Judiciary Committee and on SEEK, the Sustainable it's Energy Environment Caucus, are working on that as well. So I mean that might mean stuff like, you know, getting lawyers involved earlier in the drafting process, you know, tweaking language, you know, lots of laws say stuff like in the administrator's discretion, stuff like that. You know, tweaking that language, and also lawmakers have talked about, you know, building a longer legislative history via hearings and stuff in order to make it clear what Congress means and build a record. But in a lot of ways, I think this is a question of political will. You know, as all the staff on this call probably know, like when you negotiate a bill, it's really difficult to be specific, and oftentimes Congress is sort of intentionally vague. I mean, both sides take this vague language and think, okay, well, the agency will interpret this how I want. And the more specific you get, the more you want to talk about a specific issue in the legislative language, just the more difficult it's often going to be to get a bipartisan deal done. So, I mean, there's some real open questions about, you know, what that means. I mean, does Congress need broader reforms from the perspective of trying to, you know, like from a political will perspective? So anyway, a lot of questions outstanding, but there's some smart people working on how, you know, trying to figure this out.
Great. Yep. It's going to be tricky so good luck to any of you who's going to be working on that next year. Just a reminder that that y'all can give us live questions while we're talking through these. We're eager to serve. So just fire them away. Why don't we move on? Oh, I think we have Maria back now. So Maria, do you want to talk again a little bit? You were starting to tell us about how the AI agenda is sort of fallen away from what we expected.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry about that. Basically, all of the bills that were going to be in NDAA, those negotiations fell apart. The bill sponsors plan to reintroduce them early next year. We know that incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune is the co-sponsor of one of them, which would basically just set up the U.S. AI Safety Institute, which is a really non-controversial goal that exists in many countries around the world. But I think that kind of fell apart in the end here because it was viewed as a Biden administration and Democratic goal. I think when the politics of this changes with a Republican sweep next year, we'll see a higher probability of something, an effort like that actually getting through. Another thing that we're watching out for next week is the House AI Working group report, and we don't expect a lot of specific bills to be in that report other than the Create AI Act. We expect that report and in general the congressional approach to AI regulation to just be enforcing existing laws on the books. So that'll really take us to the agencies, and we can talk a little bit more about that on how they can enforce those laws that already exist. And we know that there will be a civil rights section in that report as well, but no specific bills named. So that's kind of similar to the Senate AI report that came out that kind of fell short among some outside civil rights groups. So that's what we're watching out for in the next 2 weeks. The other thing that I would note is that Schumer did tell us yesterday, he hinted at a possible CHIPS language in a CR. So we will be watching out for that, this Sunday when they come out with it.
Yes, we will be watching for sure. So Maria, one question that we did have submitted in advance is, what can we expect for policy changes for the FCC and the agencies that have jurisdiction over AI? Do you have any sense of that yet? I think you're muted, Maria.
Sorry. So
There
we
you go.
saw that a lot of agencies decided to have jurisdiction over AI in this past year. Like NTIA decided to come in with an accountability report. The FCC tried to come in and kind of regulate disclosure of AI in political ads. I think that the main agency to watch out for next year is the FTC and how it will enforce deceptive AI practices. This is an agency, an administration, and a Congress that might not be so friendly to big tech. And so the FTC is really not just for AI, but for tech regulation in general, the one to watch out for. And then, of course, at the FCC, with Brendan Carr being poised to be the next chair, we know that he's a big fan of big tech either. He will be exploring ways to have them pay into the Universal Service Fund. And, when we talk about Elon Musk's potential conflicts of interest being in the government, the FCC is a place to watch. How will Starlink and, that satellite company benefit from FCC funds? So those would be the two main ones that I would know.
All right. Thank you. Let's see. Why don't we move on to another question that came in beforehand. It's a healthcare question. What do you see as forthcoming in Medicare policy, including the conditions of participation, new tech payment adjustments, and MA plans? I'm not sure we can answer it at that level of specificity, but Victoria, maybe you can give us like a broader sense of what we think might be coming down the way in Medicare policy next year.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to note that incoming President Trump has consistently said he doesn't want to cut Medicare, doesn't really want to make, it doesn't seem like a ton of general policy changes in terms of things that Republicans have proposed in the past, like raising the eligibility age or, other things that seniors would probably be pretty unhappy about. So I think there won't be significant changes in that area, but I think some of the spots to watch instead are Medicare site neutral payments, possibly, especially as a way to maybe pay for some of the tax cuts in a reconciliation bill. So site neutral, as people may know, is basically equalizing Medicare payments depending on where the site of care is. So, sometimes for an off-campus place, it costs a little more than at a hospital or vice versa. So it's kind of like making those payments all equal across the board would save the government money. So there's been talk of that. There's a small one of those that was in the Lower Cost, More Transparency Act, a limited, narrow policy. It's something Republicans have been pretty interested in, but Senate Democrats haven't been as gung-ho about it. And so I think having a full GOP trifecta, we may see some more movement with site neutral. Plus, if it saves money, it could be used as a pay for. So that's something to watch. And then I also think Medicare Advantage is another area. We've seen, if you look at, if he gets confirmed, the possible new CMS administrator, Mehmet Oz. He has been really big on Medicare Advantage plans, if you look at kind of his past stances on things. And so I could think we could see a world where those are kind of MA plans are expanded. There's kind of more flexibility with them. We could also, we could see that from the more executive level, possibly. And also, I think people are watching kind of like under a new Trump administration, like what would the MA plan rates, payment rates be, and things like that. So those would kind of be the areas I would be watching for Medicare.
Right, great, thank you. So I think we can go to one more. And I bet some of the people on this call are kind of wondering about this too, but how much do we know about how Doge might affect the Hill agenda next year? We know Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have been up there, but curious if any of y'all are picking up any talk about, like how much do we know about what the impact might be?
Yeah, I feel like we don't know that much. Republicans are definitely treating it seriously, so like we should take it seriously, no doubt. But I also, the biggest question for me is, is this a budget writing exercise, or are they going to actually be able to convince committee chairs to do things? And I actually wrote this down because I thought it was a funny quote. Marcy Kaptur said to my colleague Daniel about this the other day, the newbies will come to discover the deliberative process. So I feel like I know it's a Democrat, but I do feel like that's going to be a little bit of a bipartisan sentiment, especially when it comes to the appropriators who are turfy. I mean, they want to fund the government. They don't want to make massive cuts to like programs that they like, in sort of in my issue area, like, Republicans have tried to cut various programs at DOE over the years. They will again, Doge or not, but at the same time, like Chuck Fleischman loves funding nuclear, the top energy appropriator in the House loves funding nuclear stuff, and him and Kaptur really agree on that. And then in terms of how it could affect reconciliation, Musk has supported tossing out the EV tax credits, both before and after being appointed to run Doge. That's could be very influential for sure. But then Republicans are also going to be hearing from other automakers who more directly benefit from the credit that have massive EV manufacturing, battery manufacturing investments in their districts. So I feel like it's like one more in the reconciliation front, it's like one more voice, like influential voice in favor of cutting out the EV credits, but it's also hard to know exactly how that stuff is going to land.
Yeah, for sure. And Maria, have you picked up anything?
No, I would just echo what Nick said in terms of us not knowing a lot of the details. I don't think lawmakers or the incoming administration also know a lot of the details at this point. When Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy were on the Hill last week, it was described as a brainstorming exercise. And so I think what we heard was every senator that attended kind of just came up and gave an idea, and they like got in line and would each give one idea. So I think we're not really in the detail stage yet.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. But it does sound like it's a serious exercise. They are going to be taken seriously by Hill Republicans and definitely by the president-elect. So we will too, and we'll be keeping an eye out. We hope to keep y'all informed as we pick up more. It looks like we're getting close to time, so I'm gonna hand it back over to Colin to take us home. And thanks once again for your time.
Awesome. Well, I hope you all enjoyed today's inside look at our policy reporting and analysis. If you're not already a subscriber of Axios Pro Policy, please give us a shout. Axios Pro Policy is built for you all, the modern policy professional. We all know that you can't be everywhere at once, so we'll catch you up on what's happening when you're at your busiest. Our smart communication style is conversational. It's not chatty and gets you smart quick on what you need to know. It's really news that doesn't read like homework. And so just to give you three examples, three recent examples, if you were reading Axios Pro Energy in November, you would have been one of the first to know that Senator Manchin and Senator Barrasso met with the Congressional Western Caucus to figure out a path forward for permitting overhaul. In tech policy just last week, you would have heard first that Coastal was spilling into next year. And then recently in healthcare, you would have been the first to know that congressional Republicans made Democrats an offer on a major package of year-end health provisions. And so, if these topics we covered today and other legislative matters that are driving policy forward in Congress are important to you, or if you're interested in Axios Pro, please click yes, and a member of the Axios Pro team will reach out to share more. And then finally, if you did not have a question that, if you had a question that did not get answered, remember that Axios Pro, as an Axios Pro subscriber, you can reply to any of our newsletters or email our reporters directly with feedback and questions. And then finally, look out for a recording of this session in your inbox. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.